Hi there, so I'm going to be talking with my friend Lorenz Gude, and he's an interesting guy. He lives in Perth, and he's originally American from New Jersey. He was a friend of Andy Warhol. He was in the New York art scene. He's an artist, intellectual, academic, very interesting and intelligent person, quite aged, and we have a weekly dialogue. So I'm just going to call in, and I'll be recording this for upload purposes. Don't know how long people are going to be on Earth, me included. So when he calls in, I shall let you know. But he tends to be a specialist in very intellectual, academic, or more intellectual and slightly academic topics. And I enjoy bouncing ideas, and it's intellectually sort of stimulating. And it gives us a great chance to sort of expand and educate. He'll talk about famous philosophers, people like Edmund, Husserl, Kant. He's a big fan of Carl Jung, and he frequently lectures to the Jungian Society in Perth, or internationally as well. So let's have a check-in with Lorenz. Hi there, Lorenz.
Hello, Dante. How are you?
I'm very well. Great to be in contact again. So as I said, I'll be recording this, and then it'll just be something to try, uploading it.
Right.
Cool. Okay. How's your week been?
Pretty intense, but I have to start editing my talk now. I have it in the can, the first 20 minutes in the can. And now I have to learn a lot of new tricks using iMovie to get the slide material up on the screen while I'm talking, and work out exactly how to, in practice, edit it.
Can you give a snapshot of the content topic for people who haven't heard that before?
Yeah, it's a talk about the recovery of transcendence, and quite influenced by the point that, Samsara Bhikkhu made, that we've gotten tied up in Romanticism and its endlessness in the West, and we've forgotten that there's a path to the end of suffering in Buddhism. And, that point from that book, whatever else it's about internal Buddhism and so forth, is one of the key turning points on which the talk rests, to encourage people to not think that we're stuck in endlessness.
So I suppose infinity and eternity, these are wrapped up in those kind of views in some kind of way.
Absolutely, and it isn't really one or the other, but I think we've gotten out of balance, and we've fallen back into what old Viveke calls it the continuous cosmos, or it's symbolized like by the snake biting its own tail.
Ouroboros, right?
And in Buddhism, the endless cycle of births and deaths is that. Are you just stuck in it and that's it? Well, the Buddha said no, and I'm with the Buddha on that one, strongly. And similarly, in Dante's Divine Comedy, the difference between hell, which is forever, so it's like samsara, it just goes on and on endlessly, and purgatory, you still suffer, but you come to an end of suffering in purgatory. And it's not Buddhism, but it's a very parallel idea, and that's the kind of thing I talk about in it. And I'll be putting it up in 10 to 20 minute segments. The first section just sets the stage on the time frame, that is from the time human consciousness emerged to when we had these series of religions that said transcendence was possible. The axial age religions, from Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism, the Judeo-Christian religions, and the Greek axial age. All of those happened about the same time, and we've lost touch with that. Is the gist of the talk, and how to get it back. Possible.
Do you think your experience in New York influenced the kind of topics that you are focusing on?
New York, more American, I would say. Like I've said before, you can go to obscure, isolated country towns, and you can find yourself striking up a conversation with somebody you've known for 15 seconds, and you're talking about God and eternity and what it all means. And America is simply a much more oriented that way at a very basic level. So I think I'm as American as I could be. I won't say as apple pie, but I'm because I'm not probably the average American, but as an expatriate and all that. But I think in my heart I'm very American.
Do you think that American culture still has retained any of that transcendence, natural, innate, or cultivated, pure spirituality? You're talking about out in the countryside, out in the sort of farm areas. Do you think that the people have retained that and not lost it to materialism and 20th century culture?
Yes, I think there's a great deal of confusion. There's an awful lot of fundamentalism, which is a literal mindedness that I think gets in the way of things. So people get all head up.
Can you define fundamentalism? You're not talking about Islamic, are you?
Intelligent people who don't buy the 3,500-year-old accounting that some fundamentalists say the world is 3,500 or 5,000 years old in the Bible. And they can't believe it because they're modern people and they see fossils and things like that, but they're really troubled because they get told all their life that you must believe literally in those things. So that causes a lot of confusion. But I think some of those people are getting more sophisticated and about that stuff. And I don't think it's static. And now I can only go by what's on YouTube because I'm not in America and not about to go there. But I'm not. I don't think that's gone away. And I think the more urban people are interested in spirituality in a different way. My grandson, who is in his early 20s, has discovered how liberating it is to get a job. He's working in Home Depot, which is like Bunnings in Australia. It's a big box hardware store full of power tools and nails and screws and, hammers and that stuff. And he's, it's like made all kinds of sense out of the world for him. He was didn't know what end was up. And he's expressing interest he wants to try going to church and asked me for some advice. And his father, my son, is totally secular in his attitudes. And there's his son at 22 asking his grandfather about religion. And that seems part of what is happening.
Could you share some reflection about Andy Warhol, about that time, the Beats, the Allen Ginsbergs, the poets, and the context of this
I'm
topic?
Of an age, I was born in 42, so I was 20 in, right in 62, and I'm just a little younger than the Beats, like Ginsberg and Kerouac, and just a little older than the flat-out hippies, the summer of love people. I was already married and had responsibilities, by then. But if it had happened in New York in the early '60s, I would have, then I would have been part of that. So I sort of fell between those two generations, and we had our own people, but as part of the New York art world, I was going to Columbia and I met people, as an English major, I met people interested in poetry and art, and got in with a crowd that was very much poets and a painter and things like that. And so one of the people we knew was Warhol, and the sort of leader of our group. We were in our early 20s. He was like 30, and he was a natural leader. He was an Irishman named Ted Berrigan from Providence, Rhode Island, and he loved to organize things. He used to call himself an executive poet, and which he meant he tried to help the community of poets by doing, kind of entrepreneurial things. He would ferret out old, forgotten poets and bring them forward into the public eye again. He would, promote fellow artists. The funniest thing he did was one day we were over at Andy's, and Andy loved to talk to young people, particularly earnest young people, who were deadly serious about being artists, and with all the over seriousness of youth. And he would gently chide us and say things like, knowing that we had all come to the Big Apple, to New York, to the very center of things, to make it, to be successful in the hardest place. And he knew that whole mentality that people in those days had. And so he would say, it should be easy to make it. You shouldn't worry about that. And in other words, he was challenging us by throwing out things that conflicted with our youthful collective, assumptions that we hadn't examined. And anyway, he was complaining. He was complaining that even though he'd achieved great fame with his Campbell soup cans, made the cover of Time magazine, I think, some years before, and he had all these things of Marilyn and Jackie, and that were silkscreen prints, and he was well established, and he was complaining that the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art, MoMA as it's known, hadn't any of his paintings. And Ted Berrigan piped up. He said, "If you give me one of those Marilyns, I'll put it in the men's room in the Modern Museum." So he smuggled it in under his trench coat, and he hung it in the men's room. And
this Berrigan, he's just a public. He's just a public. He didn't work at the museum or anything, right?
Oh, no, just a member of the public. And he put it in there, and it got reported in the press, not the New York Times, we all noticed, whose slogan is "all the news that's fit to print," and they decided that was a publicity stunt, and they didn't go for it. But the New York Herald Tribune did print it, and it became generally known, and within 6 months, the Metropolitan, in some reasonably short amount of time, maybe not causal, but we nudged them, and it appeared to work. Let's put it that way.
And you said at one point, I remember that Andy Warhol was actually quite religious, that he had a strong Catholic background. Did you say he's the Irish background? I thought he was Polish.
No. He's from Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
There's a town in whatever country it is, but I can see the sign Warhola as a train stop thing, and it's in somewhere like Romania, but I'm not sure that it's Romania. But that's the Wikipedia instant answer. But
And what was his idea going on there with the advertising? Having recently, I watched this series Mad Men, which was set about the New York advertising scene of around about that time.
And I worked in it at that time.
Yeah,
I was working was in the New York advertising world as a photographer.
And you had your grandfather or a great uncle, was it, who was setting up, light bulb signs on the tops of the buildings in Times Square, and was that right?
Yes, he is the actual developer of the electric billboard.
There you go.
Illuminated billboard that fills Piccadilly or any place in the world, in Tokyo and so forth. He took the nascent technology that IBM, what later became IBM, developed for the 1890 census, using punch cards to count people in a sentence, and combined it with Edison's electric light bulb, and so he used them to program sequences of lights. And his first sign was a giant pickle with electric lights in 34th Street, which is Herald Square, which is the next square down Broadway. And then he got into Times Square, and he put all those spectacular signs. That's what he called them, spectaculars. And it became, a major cultural and event, and characterized so much of modern, downtown cityscapes. And he even coined the phrase "the Great White Way" for Broadway, because he's the guy who lit it up, and there's a family picture of him hanging the first neon sign, and just a little arrow, in front of a restaurant or something like that. But it was, he was right into the technology of it.
So there's this transition in your life from farming, rural, carrying hay bales, having back problems, with struggling with real farm outback sort of territory, and then transitioning right into the heart of New York, which couldn't be more commercial, or in a way soulless, you could say. So there's this kind of recapturing of transcendence and of the soul in amongst that.
And I went right for a group of people, and people like, Warhol was not Roman Catholic. It's taken a while to figure this out, but he was Eastern Orthodox, but from a sect that celebrates Eastern Orthodoxy, has all kinds of churches plastered with icons. They're Orthodox, but they're loyal to the Pope. So they're this hybrid of East and West. And there's a YouTube on video by Jonathan Pageau about Warhol's religious art. And there was much more of it than realized. He never disclosed that to, the secular art world of the 60s. And him being gay, and, it would be very hard to be as publicly openly gay as he was, and publicly religious. It was I don't know what he felt about it, but I don't think it was wrong to sort of keep it under his hat. But evidently he went to church often, daily, I've read, and he often talked to his mothers, as gay guys often do. But he'd talk to his mother on the phone, and she was very religious in that Eastern European sect in Pittsburgh. The whole bunch of them moved. That's where he's from. They moved to Pittsburgh, and that sect is still an active Orthodox sect in Pittsburgh that's loyal to the Pope. So it's quite a funny background. But I suppose we were very secular in some ways, but like Ted eloped with a Jewish girl from Florida, and the idea of a mixed marriage between a Roman Catholic and a Jew was still a huge thing in like say 1965, and the parents, who were quite wealthy, spent all kinds of money quite futilely on lawyers. They were married, and their daughter wanted to be married to him, and that was that. But it was like it probably had more cultural force than people would appreciate today, thinking that we were just completely secular. Religion was part of our lives.
Was Buddhism?
All of us had gone to church as kids.
Was Buddhism? Sorry, Lorenzo. Was Buddhism at all present to your awareness with D.T. Suzuki, other people?
Yes, I ran it. I think I probably do it, as a reading, or shortly thereafter. That was.
Can you repeat that, because it cut out in the middle?
Aware of the interest in, like, Kerouac and Ginsberg in Eastern religion.
Did you meet them?
And
Kerouac and Ginsberg?
Not Kerouac, but Ginsberg, yes. I have pictures of him that I took at a poetry reading where he came to listen to Ted and some of the other poets that were my friends at Columbia read in Second Avenue in New York in the mid-'60s, yeah.
Was there any sense of a sort of breath of fresh air coming from Buddhism into the culture that was going to be making any sort of real difference or input that was going to be transformative?
Yes, that was for me, that was in the background, but that was definitely there. I had read, when I was 16, I'd read one of the basic textbooks of, that promoted the fresh air of other religious traditions. It's a book by a man who only recently died, Houston Smith, and called The Religions of Man, which is just a little paperback, and it just reviewed all the major religions. And I can remember my reaction to that book when I read it when I was still in high school, was that I got through the Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and then it did Hinduism and Buddhism in the next section, and it was like coming home. It was like this breath of fresh air. I got away from these religions that said their version was right and everybody else was wrong, which really put me off, and put a lot of people off about Western religions at that time. These exclusive claims, and